Welcome back to Tales of Truth, where we tell the truth about veterinary medicine. I'm Dr. Angie, and this is JoJo, my veterinary nurse. And today we are going to be talking about end-of-life care. And while this is a really sad topic, it's really important, and we want you to feel supported. So we're going to tell you everything that we know.
That's
And
such an
everything
important
we
topic,
think
right?
you
Because
should know. Yeah.
every pet parent is going to experience it.
Because we all die,
Yeah, and
and so do our
because
pets.
lifespans, theirs versus ours,
Yeah.
are just, I feel like everybody's going to experience this if you have a pet.
Yes, it's guaranteed. It's part of what we sign up for. And yesterday morning, I found myself doing a last-minute betta euthanasia before
What is
school.
a betta?
So a betta is a fish.
Okay, betta fish.
Yeah, so my youngest Tula got a betta fish for her birthday about 1.5 years ago. And we knew that betta fish only lived about 2 years. And when you go to PetSmart, you don't know how old the fish is when you get the fish. So Tony Roni, our betta fish, he has had bladder disease. So he keeps like sinking to the bottom. And I've done all the treatment. Basically what I read is that at some point, there's some other cause to their bladder disease, like some other underlying cause. Like I think mom probably had a tumor or something like that. And so Tula and I have been talking about Tony Roni's quality of life and when it might be appropriate to send Tony Roni over the Rainbow Bridge. But it's been an interesting conversation to have with a 7-year-old because I hear the gears going, and we still have these conversations in our head as adults, but you hear the gears going of like, well, I don't want him to suffer, but I'm going to be really sad if he's not here. And so trying to explain to a 7-year-old that the decisions we make for Tony Roni have to be in Tony Roni's best interest and not in ours. And that's
love this
so hard.
conversation.
Yes.
Oh, but I just want to wrap Tula up in a little hug because that's
Yes.
so hard to have that conversation.
So hard. And it's understandable. The feelings that she's expressing and verbalizing are so human. We're like, I don't want to experience this loss. I don't want to send my pet on because I don't want to live without them. Even though they might be suffering and we, of course, want the best for them. It's hard to ignore the part where you're like, no, I don't want you to die. You have to stay. This is not how this was supposed to play out. Even when we get to keep them their whole lifespan, we're never really ready.
Well, and it's just so dynamic to me, the attachment that Tula can have to a fish.
I
You
know.
It's like, oh, I mean,
I made the mistake of
Roni.
saying,
Yeah.
did you feel really close to Tony Roni? Because you didn't really interact with him. And she said, yes, Mom. Tony Roni was my fish and he talked to me.
I
was
believe
like,
her.
yeah. And I realized that what I said was insensitive. And I think as a veterinarian, I think growing up with a mom that's a veterinarian has some disadvantages because the way I talk about death can be very matter of fact.
Very practical.
And very practical. And I have posed a lot of our animals' euthanasias as, very practical, even though they're emotional. And I'd like to think I have a lot of emotional intelligence and softness. I think sometimes being a veterinarian's child is probably a little harsh. I don't know.
I don't know, because when you're telling that story, I was Tula's age when I lost Tom and Jerry, and those were my fish. And my
Aw.
parents, I wish they would have at least had the conversation. It was, we're going to flush them down the toilet.
Oh,
Right. And I think that's probably from my generation of probably a lot of what happened to fish. But I never ate fish again after that.
from Tom and Jerry.
Still to this day.
Oh,
So I had a deep attachment to Tom and Jerry because, they were in my space all the time. They were a presence. They were something I had to care for.
absolutely.
So maybe you're practical in your conversations, but at least the conversation's being had. And there's a lot of respect for the life of Tony Roni.
Yes, I thought it was very important for her to understand that if we can relieve Tony Roni's suffering, it's important, and that we're not going to make him better. I've already tried the treatment. The treatment failed, and now there's nothing else to do to make him feel better. And that, not being able to swim up to the top to get his food is probably feeling really bad for him. So,
And so how does euthanasia of a betta fish take place? Because if you're not flushing it down the toilet like my parents did.
Yeah. Um, so it's 7:30 a.m. And actually, I had spoken to another veterinarian about euthanizing fish before, and she said use clove oil. So at 7:30 a.m., I am on Veterinary Information Network, trying to figure out how I can humanely euthanize this fish because, I don't think I can just like stick euthanasia solution inside this fish. It doesn't work
Uh-huh.
like that. So, and I wasn't about ready to pour controlled barbiturate into this tank of water. Like, I'm pretty sure my DEA license would get revoked immediately. And so I Googled as I'm packing lunches how I might do that. And so I just found my stash of essential oils back from when we were all either part of doTERRA or Young
Yeah.
Living.
Yeah.
So I I found my stash and I put a bunch of clove oil in his tank and he had the most peaceful death. He just
Mm.
went to sleep. Not that I've euthanized a lot of fish, so I can't say, that but it seemed very peaceful. He just went to sleep. And that's the idea, is it just like renders them unconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
So,
let's talk about euthanasia in the sense of when I was getting my death doula license for animal medicine,
hmm
euthanasia is spoken about as a good death.
yes,
And but as we've seen in practice, not every person believes in euthanasia.
they do not.
And I always find that to be a really challenging space of how to have the conversation about end of life when you can actively see that their pet is in this transition from, life to death.
Yes.
And so how do you approach that conversation?
Well, I actually grew up in a family that supposedly did not believe in euthanasia. So I was an ashram kid, more or less, and my family has a guru in India. My mom's not alive anymore, so I kind of feel like I always use my parents in the past tense. They have a guru in India, and everything's very much about karma, being a vegetarian. And the idea was that you don't want to eat animals, kill them for any reason, and that includes euthanasia because suffering has a purpose.
Mm.
And so that's how I was raised. Although I think if push came to shove, I think our family pets would have been euthanized. Although that we did have one cat that I think had kidney failure that suffered for too long, in my opinion. And so I, of course, as a veterinarian, did not continue that belief. So I came up in that. But once you get to veterinary school and you take the oath that your job is to alleviate suffering and continue the human animal bond, it becomes very clear that euthanasia is such a gift.
Uh-huh.
And I would rather be euthanized than left to suffer.
Uh,
And so while I understand why people might have differing beliefs, it's nothing that I have continued on into my career. And for those that do want to let their animals die naturally, which you and
uh-huh.
I can talk about what that means, there are a lot of ways that we can help alleviate suffering. But if you've ever hospiced a person, like I did with my own mother, that's really uncomfortable. And you can just be unconscious on narcotics, but it's
Right.
still not comfortable for them.
Well,
It's awful.
yeah, it's pretty. I think that is challenging. That let your pet die naturally. I find myself really challenged in that space because a natural death is not necessarily a peaceful death.
No.
But I think that's what I hear when people say, I just want them to have a natural death.
Yeah.
I think that the idea that they are presenting is that this will be to no fault of their own, to no fault. That I think we all wish that we wouldn't have to make that life or death decision for another being. It's incredible responsibility, especially for something and someone or something, yeah, right,
Yeah.
that we
Well, it feels
love, right?
unnatural.
And that we have
Yeah.
to, yeah, it's an incredible decision, an incredible weight to have to make. So I think sometimes when I hear that, I think they really are saying, I don't want to make that decision for my pet. But a natural death in the wild, if our pets were really having a natural death, would not be so peaceful. They would likely be left behind by their group, left to prey, as prey, left to predators, and
Hmm.
or they would just suffer immensely until they just couldn't take another step forward. And I have a memory of a client who had this cat who had not eaten in so long. It had been well past the time which we would have thought that this cat would have passed without eating. And the cat kept going outside and going underneath the bush. And she would call me and say, well, I just keep bringing him back in, like, and I just felt like I think the cat is really, if we were really listening, trying to excuse itself, and find that peaceful place it knew that his time was done. But sometimes we want to hold on so tightly that we just keep bringing them back, and it's so hard to know where that line is.
It's really hard, especially when it's your own pet.
Oh,
You're
even
so
doing
close.
this, even no matter how many euthanasias I've been a part of, when it comes to my own pet, I am going to need guidance and need,
Yes.
um, I just won't. Well, the way I had the conversation with my last dog, who was 16, is I felt it was a conversation.
Hmm.
Every day I would check in with him until the point that he was just like, I'm just so tired. That was the words or the energy that I felt from him, that he was just tired. He was done.
I was too tired.
Yeah, and if
Yes.
I was going to keep going with the treatments and all of that, that was really my will, not his.
Yes. And that's the hard part is understanding what part you're doing for you and what part
Uh-huh.
you're doing for them. And it
And
can
that's
be
where the
really
trusted
hard.
third party can be really
Yes.
useful. If you have a trusted third party, such as your veterinarian,
Yes.
you asked a really great question right before this episode, is if you could ask your veterinarian, how does this disease typically play out? I think that's a fantastic question and a fantastic conversation to have.
And that's what most people ask me when they come to me as for a second opinion or if I am delivering the terminal diagnosis. Most people ask, what happens if I don't euthanize my dog? How is this going to look? And that is really different in every disease process. And some of those deaths play out more painfully than others. Like dogs with hemangiosarcomas, I find do one of two things. One, they don't feel well and they don't eat because they have a large space occupying mass that makes it hard for them to eat. And then they bleed to death so slowly that they're so tired and nauseous and feel awful. Or the second situation is they bleed quickly. And
Uh-huh.
people always feel such tremendous guilt for that moment. But I tell people that's the most peaceful death. Like bleeding out quickly, you just go to sleep.
Uh-huh.
Relatively painless, like that is the way to go. But it's hard to come home and find your dog that has already passed away or when they just drop in the backyard.
Uh,
And that has happened to me. My dog died of hemangiosarcoma, but he fell down, had a seizure, and just didn't keep breathing. And so for him, that was a really peaceful death.
but
But for
traumatic for you and the girl,
oh,
I imagine.
it was so traumatic for me. He
Yeah.
was fine the whole time, but
Uh-huh.
I was traumatized. I mean, seizures are so violent.
They're so hard to see.
And then
They're
he
so
just
hard to
wasn't going to
witness.
start breathing. And I'm like rushing him, getting him into the car because I'm like, I'm going to go take him to Dr. Zapori. And then I'm just
Uh-huh.
thinking, no, I'm not. Well, like it's hard
Yeah.
to think about what's going to happen next because I didn't actually know he had cancer at the time. But I think when your dog or cat gets that terminal diagnosis, it's really important to look at what might happen and talk to your veterinarian
Uh-huh.
about the progression.
Well, and I think that's an important piece of this too, because at some point, your animal is going to pass from their disease state, and sometimes that's rushing them to the emergency room. And is that like
Yes.
playing out, like what do you want that transition to look like? Do you want it to be frenetic and running to an emergency room where they're euthanizing, or do you want it to be in their bed at home with all their favorite people? Like
Yes.
there's some beautifulness in that choice as well.
With my last horse, Denny, I made that choice. He was really arthritic and having trouble getting around. He was doing it. He was okay. But I decided on a Sunday afternoon, I think it was last May, he was okay. And I decided to let him go. And my veterinarian, because I don't do horse medicine anymore, but my veterinarian was like, most of these guys I have to euthanize in a really traumatic way because they've fallen down into a ditch and they're scared and they're,
Uh-huh.
really in a lot of distress and pain. And he got to take his last breath on a day with his friends eating
Uh-huh.
grass when it was warm outside. And so he didn't have to be uncomfortable. And I think that is important to consider if you can.
It really, I think, it really is. That it's such a valuable piece. And I think
Hmm.
it's so tricky because that question too has come up for myself with my own decisions about when is the right moment? Like when is and that's where a quality of life checklist can come in. How many
Hmm.
calendar days has your pet not been feeling themselves? Like, because we can start to lie to ourselves. We can
Oh,
start to lie to ourselves.
absolutely.
And our pets can do these rallies that all of a sudden we think that they are like, wow, they're well. I
I
mean, we see it
know.
all the time, and then they tank.
And then they
Um,
tank.
so
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a sweet spot. I like to believe there's this sweet spot before there's suffering. And that's where you and I have differed sometimes. I'm like, I kind of want to cut it off before there's any suffering. And I think you're more on the side of like some suffering's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably from my upbringing, but I always tell people you can do it too early, you can do it at the perfect time, or you can do it too late.
Hmm.
And you're never going to know what the perfect time is. And
No.
so everyone's always concerned, oh, I think I did it too early, or I
Yeah.
think I did it too late. And I think knowing that you're going to feel at one and the other is it like important to accept.
Uh-huh.
Very rarely do you feel like, oh, that was the perfect timing. And knowing which one of those you're going to have more peace with because you're going to be
Uh-huh.
the one having to live with that decision.
Uh-huh.
And so,
Oh, it's such a challenge. But I also believe if you have a good veterinarian, they're not going to euthanize your pet too early. They're going to tell
no,
you that it's not time. Um, so you can kind of set that down, put that
that's
weight on
true.
your veterinarian's shoulders. Like most are not going to do that. And most are going to interject too if they're feeling like it's
Yeah.
definitely time. I don't think that we really ever judge if you're not ready to make that decision.
No, we understand. We
Huh.
totally, I would say 99% of the veterinarians I've worked with, they don't judge. No
No,
one's
but you have a
thinking, oh,
responsibility to, on behalf of that animal, to say, at
yes.
this point, he or she is suffering.
Most
Like,
veterinarians will hurt your feelings in order to advocate for your pet.
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we're willing to do that. We're taught to because we
Uh-huh.
took the oath
But
to,
that's also challenging. There's another
yeah.
side of that because I feel sad sometimes when we have clients who have a brick and mortar that's maybe not meeting them where they're at in terms of like they're not ready to euthanize, but they don't go get the medicine that they need or the support that they need
Yeah.
because they feel so much pressure that they're just going to be really pressured to euthanize and they're not ready yet. And so
Right.
that's tricky too.
Yeah, that is really tricky. That's when you have to find a veterinarian that is going to support you and that
Uh-huh.
you have a good working relationship with. It's so important.
And if you're able, if you're in that space of having close to making that decision with your pet and you can do an in-home euthanasia, I just think once I've had an in-home euthanasia, I don't want to do it any other way.
It's so much
I
better.
mean, and I know that that's a gift and that's a privilege, and not every situation, an end of life situation, is going to present that way. But when you're in that hospice or quality of life space, like you can engage the end of life veterinarian so that they're ready for you, or your veterinarian sometimes will do house calls for
Hmm.
this moment. And that's kind of, I think there's comfort in knowing that somebody can come when it's time.
Absolutely.
Because
Yes,
sometimes that moment shows up very quickly sometimes.
it does. I always tell people that are worried, is it time? Is it time? I always say, don't worry. That decision makes itself.
It really does.
It has its own life
Mhm.
and it makes its own self known.
And
Yeah.
that comes back to trusting yourself.
Yes.
And you know your pet, you know your dog, you know your cat.
I
Like I know
know.
it sounds weird to say, but have the conversation with them.
I talked to all of my dying pets. I
Yeah,
didn't talk to the fish. I didn't
I was
talk to
going to
Tony
ask
Roni.
but Tula might have.
Tula might have, yes, but I've talked to all my cats.
Mm.
And well, I didn't get to have a conversation with my dog. I've talked to everyone about it. And I don't think that's crazy at all. And they always tell me. And when I don't know, it's because it's not clear and it's not time.
Uh-huh.
Usually my not knowing is just an indication that it's just not time yet. You
And
don't
I actually
know.
love this because do have a client whose cat is older, and it seemed that that time was coming. And
Mhm.
she was having conversations with her cat, and she's like, I don't think she's quite there yet. And so there was this big advocacy for let's really support her. And she's doing fantastic. And that was
Yeah,
it, like, so we can get it wrong sometimes. And you know your
absolutely.
pet best.
Yes, you do know your pet best. And yeah, ask other people. I mean, when you and
Mm.
I were making house calls and Simba had been diagnosed with lymphoma, you were coming over and saying, like, oh, he doesn't look so good. And that was important because days had gone by in between the last time you saw him and the present time. And so I was like, oh, isn't that right? Didn't you see him and not
Yeah,
looking so
and I
well?
mean,
Yeah.
sometimes I could see like his weight change. Like just think
Yeah.
about human to human. Like you live with people, you don't always see their weight gain, but if you go away for
Right.
a week and come back, you're like, oh, like when did that start? It's just because when we're in close connection,
Yes.
yeah, and you'll hear it from pet sitters, like, oh, that
Yes.
she had more energy, or she was not moving around as much, or she would, you know, they seem to notice things that we maybe don't.
You know what's really hard is when animals are loved by a couple and they don't agree
Oh,
about when it's
so
time.
hard.
Oh, that breaks my heart because then it becomes a relational problem. And you know,
Yeah,
both of those people want what's best for that pet.
yeah.
And
And they're
then
just
in their
managing grief differently.
right, in their time of grief, they need each other and then they're at odds. And I see that and I'm just like, oh, I feel so sad for them.
That happens a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, that's actually fantastic. Like that's where I think those quality of life checklists come in so great because
Yeah.
you're unbiased in what you're saying. Did your cat eat? Did your cat drink water? Did your cat
Yes.
like, you know, there are just these checklists and you can start to see a pattern. And
Yes.
that's just data.
I always tell people to keep a journal, rate the
Uh-huh.
days, because most of the time when animals have a terminal disease, they're going to go up and down, and that's to be expected. And on the good days, it doesn't mean they're going to be good forever, and the bad days doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be bad forever. But if you can get a pattern and be like, oh, yeah, usually we have 2 good days and then a bad day and then another good day, but we've had 5 bad days in a row, and we have that, basically more like objective data
Uh-huh.
to go off of like, yeah, they vomited or, they didn't go on the walk or they couldn't do this or didn't want to engage. They didn't meet me at the door. Those things can be really important and you have to write them down because when you're hospicing a person or a pet, time is not real.
Uh-huh.
Everything, all the days blur together. You're stressed, you're not sleeping, so write it down. Keep a journal.
It's so that's an important piece of advice because I do think too that we can grab onto those moments of hope. Like
Yeah.
just the one thing. Oh, appetite's great because my cat ate dinner, but your cat didn't eat for 2 days before this or the 2 days after.
Right. You're
So,
like licking a little bit of fancy feast doesn't
yeah.
count. Yeah. Oh,
And
so hard.
such a hard decision, always.
It's so
It's
hard.
rarely easy.
Yes. And this is when you need to have a good conversation with your veterinarian and you need to have a good relationship to have that conversation.
And I would add to that it can be helpful with that big life decision if you want a second opinion. It's just to make extra sure. Dr. Angie does offer video consultations, and a lot of them are these opinions, second opinion, just wanting to make sure, like, is this the best path forward? So,
Yes. I can be your veterinarian in that moment. I can
uh-huh.
help you make that decision. So you can find us there, boulderholisticvet.com. And then what's our forward slash?
Oh, the
How do I
video
find
consultations,
it?
I would
Yeah.
recommend, we're working on this,
Just
going
go
to
to the website.
boulderholisticvet.com and click on video consultations.
Click on,
All the
yeah.
information would be there.
Right. So we don't have our new redirect. So I can help you if you just need a different opinion, if you want to run it by me.
A care
I'm
plan.
the care plan. Are we doing everything we can for pain management? Some
Uh-huh.
veterinarians really nail pain management. And I think others just, I don't know if they get busy or they just haven't done a lot of continuing education, but there's a lot of things that we can do to help your pet with their end of life time with less pain. And
Uh-huh.
so That's
and
important. I
help
can
your
give you some
decision
ideas.
making in that time.
Yes,
So you can set down the guilt or the shame or just the unknown. We can be a sounding
absolutely.
board for that.
We would love to hear from you. Tell us about your end of life time
Oh,
with your pet. How do you know? We would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment wherever you're watching this, and we will see you next
next
time.
time.
Bye.